We are very fortunate to have with us Mayor Richard Bailey from the city of Coronado. We have Lance Rodgers, who lives in the Cays and has been working on this problem both with city government and with some of the people in Mexico, the EPA and the international water people. And then I've got Doug Liden and Eric Dubinsky from the EPA to talk a little bit about what's going on. And there's been a lot of changes. Things have been evolving rapidly. Serge Dedina, the mayor of Imperial Beach, was scheduled to be with us. Serge had a conflict and begged off. But we'll start off by asking each of the people to introduce themselves, make a brief statement. Then I've got some groundbreaking questions. And then I actually received written comments from Serge, so I'll put those on the record on his behalf. So we'll start with Mayor Bailey. Richard, why don't you go ahead and say hello to everybody and give us your little spiel before we get to the questions.
Awesome. Well, hey, good evening, everyone. Brian, thank you so much for hosting and the invitation. Obviously, this issue is, in my opinion, probably the single greatest tangible environmental issue that has faced our region for generations now. And I know it's very frustrating for everyone that's been watching this unfold for so long. I do think, though, the good news with this issue, and one of the silver linings of this issue, is that when you look back over the past 6 years or so, what you have found with this issue is across the board bipartisan support that has extended from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, within our own congressional delegation, from people with as diverse political views as Darrell Issa to Scott Peters and Juan Vargas, and even our regional leaders here down to local level. So as frustrating as this issue is, I'm confident that it is on the right track and that we will see a resolution. It's no longer a question of if, it is simply a question of when, and that when is becoming increasingly clear. And also, I think this really is a template for how we as a region and hopefully as a nation can tackle some other issues too.
Thank you very much. Let's jump to Doug Liden. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell what you do for the EPA.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Doug Liden. I'm an environmental engineer. I'm currently based out of the San Diego border office. I just returned from a 10-month assignment to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, where I was working on a binational agreement with Mexico on an agreement for investment across the border on this issue. And we're going to be announcing the results of that effort on the 18th. And so we're very excited about that and completely agree with Mayor Bailey. I think there has been a silver lining in that it really has brought together, I think, a lot of different walks of life and working on a sort of a comprehensive solution that we think is going to make great strides to improving the water quality for both sides for people on both sides of the border. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Lance, why don't you jump in? Lance Rodgers, resident of the Cays and our current environmentalist.
I'm Lance Rodgers. So I also own ARC Environmental Solutions. So tangentially, my time in the River Valley has always been spent for free. I did do one project for the state as a pilot project to get the plastics out of the River Valley against the barrier netting. But echoing what Doug and Richard both said, back in 2017, the large spill, it was around 243 million gallons, kind of put this on everybody's radar again. And in comparison, I would say it was a small spill, but it got the ball rolling and got the focus to where we are now with funding coming forward. And hopefully within a few years, boots on the ground and breaking ground for some improvements in the River Valley and also at Punta Bandera, 6 miles south of the border, which is an ongoing problem as well. It discharges water 365 days a year, 25 to 35 million gallons by best estimates. So I am also cautiously optimistic that we are finally moving forward with some tangible results to happen in the River Valley.
Thank you, Lance. Eric, no, didn't want to make you be last, but somebody has to be. I always learn coaching baseball. There's always somebody batting ninth and playing right field. So Eric Dubinsky, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at the EPA.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. So hi, I'm Eric Dubinsky. I'm a scientist with US EPA and I'm based out of San Francisco. And I work in the water quality standards and assessment section of our office, and we work with the state of California on their water quality monitoring programs. And I serve as the beach coordinator for our region. So I work with the state on their beach monitoring programs. And so I'm here to answer questions about the new test. I'm sure you all are familiar with some of the issues that have surrounded the implementation of the test and the increase in beach advisories and closures. And obviously that's had an impact on the community. And it's a challenge to understand, where the process for adopting this test and what the results are telling us and why they may be telling us different outcomes than the old test. So happy to discuss and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, we're going to start off. I actually gave everybody in the group questions ahead of time, and I'm going to jump in since Serge can't be with us, and his is pretty well known. Serge was asked to discuss the impacts on community health, coastal ecosystems, and equitable beach access. Serge is of the opinion that there's, in spite of the fact that we will eventually, hopefully in the near future, deal with the capital improvements necessary to greatly diminish, if not eliminate, the ongoing problem of sewage discharges, that one of the things that we have to realize is that the length of time that this has been going on has damaged some of the coastal ecosystems, and they will need time to recover. They will need help from us to recover, whether it's plankton, kelp beds, various fish that have been impacted, as well as actually coastal on the ground life gets impacted. So one of his biggest concerns all along has been the environmental consequences are not going to be over simply because we stop the flow of sewage into the ocean. So that was Serge's opening question and his opening statement. So with that, I'll move on. Mayor Bailey, I think everybody here is interested to hear what the economic impact has been on the city, not just our residents, but our businesses, the tourism industry, which we rely on it. It's obviously been a real challenge this summer. So we were hoping you could share with us some of the information that we're probably not privy to. And that is what's happened economically speaking. Is this hurting the city's tax revenues? What's going on?
Sure, great question, Brian. So yeah, I think this issue obviously has some type of effect, obviously, on the environment. It also has an effect on commerce, and it has an effect on personal health of the people enjoying the water. We don't actually have any data to quantify what the effect on our commerce is here in the city of Coronado. It's one of those questions that'd be nearly impossible to tease out with any type of certainty when looking at, say, our transient occupancy tax or our sales tax. It's really hard to kind of see how fluctuations in day-to-day beach closures actually have an impact on sales tax or TOT. And part of the reason for that is because of when those types of tax revenues are collected. So short of just doing kind of a qualitative survey of businesses, we don't really have a good answer to that question. And something that the viewers might be fascinated to know about is that when I raised this question, but from the lens of what is the personal health effects that we're actually seeing from people enjoying the water when the water quality is poor, I raised this question with the County of San Diego to see if they have been tracking increased levels of illnesses related to Coronado beaches or IB beaches. And the response from the county was that it's not something they track either. So we don't actually have a good barometer for what is the economic impact and also what is the personal health impact.
Thank you. That's a big mystery to all of us, and I guess it's still a mystery to our leadership in the city as well. So thank you for sharing that. Let's move on, Doug. I'm going to ask you to address something that if the note I just got from Serge is correct, it looks like there's some good news on this front, and that is we've got another recent collapse of infrastructure in the last week in Mexico. Another broken pipe, I guess, is the layman's way to put it. What's happening near term to address that so it doesn't compound the other existing problems?
Yeah, as most of you have read about, there are two pipes that run parallel to the coast, and these pipes carry both river water during dry summer months and during dry months. They carry river water that's pumped out of the Tijuana River. They also carry about 25 or 15 to 25 million gallons a day of untreated sewage to the coast. And that has to get piped about 300 feet uphill, about 15 or about 20 kilometers. And so one of those pipes, it was a 1984, I think, pipe. The pressure valve blew when they were starting it after some repairs, and that eroded the entire hillside, which wiped out the other adjacent larger pipe. That pipe broke. As a result, Mexico had to turn off their pump stations, both in the river and the pump station that carries that water to the coast. And so that is resulting in these very contaminated river flows coming down across the border. Fortunately, the International Treatment Plant has been able to take on a lot of excess flows, but clearly not something, it's clearly having an impact and on the beaches, and especially with this south swell, it's putting this source of very contaminated water very close to both Imperial and Coronado Beach. So we just received very good news today that the larger of those two pipes has been connected. I've been out there a few times, but it's been a really phenomenal effort on behalf of the Mexican government. They've been working 24/7 to repair about 1,500 meters of pipe, replace it's a 48-inch line, and they've had to regrade an entire hillside that eroded, in addition to and then basically pull out this old pipe and put in new pipe. So that has been completed today. They're starting to pressurize that line, and hopefully within the next day or two, we should have a cessation of these transboundary river flows. So regarding the question of what can be done, this is precisely the reason for the project that we have proposed, which is to expand the International Treatment Plant. By doubling the capacity of that plant, the goal is to prevent raw sewage from having to be pumped up that hill. And that would, because pumping, sewage does not like to be pumped uphill. There's a great saying that in California, water flows uphill towards money, but sewage almost always flows down, likes to flow downhill. So the real goal of this project is to cut the challenges that Mexico has in pumping this water to the coast, whereas many of you already know this water doesn't get treated anyway. And so in addition to doing that, Mexico has a plan underway. They intend to go out for bid in December, but to build a new plant at San Antonio Los Buenos that would handle the coastal flows as well as the flows in the canyons. And so those are the kind of things we're working on. We're also working on a potential project to treat the river in the US, but that would be provided we get additional funds from Congress. But the first phase would be to expand the International Treatment Plant and really get rid of, or really basically cut Mexico's operations to send that water to the coast.
Thank you, Doug. Lance, I'm going to pivot to you now and have you talk a little bit more about the overall scope and magnitude of everything that needs to be done in order to get a functioning binational sewage treatment system where we both are happy with the results.
That wasn't the question you gave me earlier, but okay.
Well, what can the cities, the EPA, the IW do right now to start addressing without waiting for the funding? But
that's a more important question, and
let's stick with that then.
Yeah, the EPA's got a very good handle on alternates of what they can be doing, so I'll let them handle that one. But I think really in the short term, what we should be looking at is whether it be with US help or with Mexican help, that we get into San Antonio or San Antonio de los Buenos, Punta Bandera, and do a stopgap measure. We're 5-6 years away from having anything implemented to stop that flow or mitigate that flow. There's technology available. There's some retention ponds still functional there. There's the bits and pieces of a formerly functioning treatment plant are still there. So the question is, can we put some things back online to mitigate this flow of 25 to 35 million gallons a day? I would think that would be the place I would start, knowing that we're 4 years away from tangible results. Second thing I would do is provide better reporting from the county DEH. We have this great new DDPCR, but when you look at the reporting through San Diego Beach Info, we're looking at stale data. That data is then provided to the State Water Board, and that's uploaded so you can look at it. But that data is always 2 or 3 days old when it should be in real time from the county. So, people that want to know, what does the water quality data look like? Is it one number over acceptable limits? Is it one number below? We can make educated choices whether we want to go and use the water. But when we have old data, you never have it in real time. So what's the point, other than giving us these warnings and closures? What's the point of having this data if we can't actually use it in a timely manner? There are several things that really can be focused on. The other longer term goal would be the fact that there's no funding to actually restore anything in the Tijuana River Valley. It's supposed to be a river valley. It's not meant to be a trash and sewage conveyance system. Well, this was a river that flowing through riparian, beautiful environmental area that's completely damaged now. So what about the trash? What about the mitigation? What about restoring the flow patterns that have historically been in the river valley as we work towards what Serge was mentioning, a more healthy environment for the flora and the fauna before it reaches the ocean and once it reaches the ocean? And the last thing I would say is better aggregation of data points. SCOOS has a fantastic plume tracker. The city of San Diego has offshore monitors for the South Bay International Treatment Plant and for Point Loma that actively look at the water quality offshore. But there's no place that aggregates all this information so people can see a real picture of what's happening on a day-to-day basis and what's healthy and what's unhealthy and what are the point sources of some of these flows and some of these times that we get closures.
Thank you, Lance. And that's a great opportunity for us to shift to Eric and have Eric talk a little bit about the difference between the old test and the new test, one element of which I understand to be, at least relatively speaking, faster results and more close to real-time data. But it sounds to me like we've got a lot of data sources that are not being aggregated. So Eric, you probably know more about that than anybody. I'll let you tell us about the new test versus the old test, as well as all these other data points and what they could be done to give us more accurate, timely information for the general public.
Sure. Yeah. So the new test was adopted and implemented, starting this past May. And there's been a lot of research that has gone into these new rapid DNA tests, both by EPA. EPA has developed its own rapid test, and the test that's being used now by the county is kind of the next evolution of that. So the technology and DNA detection has evolved rapidly over the last decade. And so the county has worked with the California Department of Health, UC San Diego, and the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, which is like a regional research institute down in Southern California that does a lot of research into these types of tests. And they essentially adapted the EPA rapid DNA detection method to this new technology. And so the questions come up, well, why is it that it looks like you're getting some different results, and shouldn't they be identical? And we know that they do not always give identical information back. And so I'm going to explain a little bit about the process for adopting these tests and the EPA approval of the tests, kind of give some context around why that is. So, EPA works with the state and the county on ensuring that their water quality testing procedures their notification thresholds are consistent with EPA guidelines. And so EPA has recommended or approved tests that have been approved for national use. But those approvals don't keep up with the technology, and EPA acknowledges this and has procedures for states to adopt new tests and establish consistency and equivalency with existing tests and methods in order to develop testing guidelines that are equally as protective for public health. And so the California Department of Health, in collaboration with the county, did a study where they looked at the performance of the new test and used these EPA guidelines to validate the new test and establish the notification thresholds. And they did all that by the book. The way they did it was valid. The threshold is a valid threshold. But we know that there are some instances where the two tests don't agree. And so, the question is, well, why is that? The tests do not need to be a perfect match in order to validate, the new technology against the old technology. But they do have to have a minimum level of agreement over the range of where the notification threshold, that number that is used as a notification threshold. So a statistical relationship is established, notification threshold is derived. And so that's how that test was developed. And that was the basis for EPA's approval to use the new test within San Diego County. But the big difference is that at the low end, there are times where the old test was failing to detect sewage that was coming up from south swells. And there's some additional data that was used to confirm that indeed there are, that the new test has a better correspondence with sewage in the water than the old test. And so this is the basis for that discrepancy. Obviously, it's had an impact on the community. And so there's been a lot of scrutiny and questions about the new test, which is totally understandable. But I can say that the test has been properly tested and calibrated. And happy to answer, additional questions about it.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's nice to hear a little bit more detail on how the county ended up rolling this out, but only after you guys looked at how they were doing it. Mayor Bailey, that leads into another question that I received ahead of time from one of our people, and that is, how are we notifying people other than the signs on the beach? Are we using Nixle or any other type of information that people can readily access in real time without having to drive down to Ocean Drive and look at the signs?
Great question. So the way notifications work, and Lance raised this point a little bit when he was talking about the data that's available online does tend to be outdated by at least 24, sometimes up to 72 hours. However, the city is notified almost immediately by the County of San Diego when those results are made available. And when those results are made available, pending the county's policies for closures on that particular week or month, we go ahead and put up the appropriate sign or no sign at all. And that's the most immediate response. We have considered doing Nixle alerts in the past, and for those of you that might be unaware of Nixle alerts, you are able to sign up through the city's website to receive a text and or email, mostly just in the event if there's any major traffic backups, especially along the bridge or the Silver Strand. So we did consider at one point in time including water quality notifications on Nixle. The difficulty the reason we ultimately decided against that is mostly because of the timeliness of the data. And that if people were going to be relying on our Nixle alerts, we felt as though we should at least be able to say with confidence that if you haven't received an alert, the water is of satisfactory quality. And if you do receive an alert, then you know that the water is of unsatisfactory quality. Because of the delay in when the county does notify the city, and because of the oftentimes changing policies, we did not feel confident that we'd be able to give the public that type of assurance. So we did not feel that it was appropriate for the public to be relying on a notification system that would not always be accurate or timely.
That's a dilemma.
It is a little bit.
Yeah, I think you may have just summarized a large portion of the general public's confusion. And that is, if it's going to be closed, why can't you tell us before we get to the beach?
Yeah.
And I guess you've made a good point, though, and that is, if your absence of the notification is an implied everything's okay, but you're not sure that the data is current, then you probably have some liability exposure for the implication that things are okay when they're not.
We don't, the city doesn't, I've had this question before, like in terms of what kind of liability would the city be under? And we don't really see much liability in the sense of notifications, mostly because it doesn't necessarily fall under the city purview. This is this type of authority and this type of regulation and exercise really falls primarily on the county of San Diego, like it's their requirement. So anything we would be doing would simply be an effort to assist their efforts.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, next question, and Doug, I'll jump to you, and that is, I just received a message, actually literally like 30 minutes ago from Surge, that says that there's been some major concessions as of yesterday with Mexico over immediately starting to do some work down at Punta Bandera along the lines with what Lance said about chlorination, using some of the retention ponds that are there. In other words, reactivating those pieces of that system that can be functional, simply in an effort before the construction project gets going to reduce the amount. Can you share a little bit more information about that? Because I would have loved to add Surge, but he said that there's been a tentative agreement reached as of last night, and that's a little fresh for me to get into.
Yeah, no, I just read that on KPBS, and I talked to the city of Imperial Beach, and we're not really clear where that. I know he did have a meeting with officials at the state of Baja yesterday, and so all I can say is that I'm meeting with the utility tomorrow morning, and so we'll certainly raise that. We've raised this issue before to them. We've even done an analysis on San Antonio Los Buenos and sort of what it would take. I certainly wouldn't, suggest we start dumping, chlorine into raw sewage as a sort of a treatment or disinfection method that has all sorts of environmental impacts. And would take an awful lot of chlorine to sort of kill off the viruses. But I think something that definitely I agree with Lance that it's definitely something that deserves us looking into because of the length of time it's going to take to get this new plan. I think they're hoping to have by late 2024, 2025 the new San Antonio Los Buenos up and running, and a little bit later for the new the expanded international treatment plant. So that's something we'll certainly explore, but I don't have anything. The one thing I also want to mention is that going back to the other issue, we did fund under, in fact, this is what kind of started this whole sort of, I think, notion. In fact, for a long time, Mayor Dedina was complaining about how they were seeing impacts on the beaches, and the water quality data was not bearing that out, but it was during especially South Swell. And he long claimed that San Antonio Los Buenos, the treatment plant 6 miles south of the border, or rather the discharge point, was having impacts on the US. So we funded a project with Scripps that used a very sophisticated 3D model that looked at nearshore currents. It was validated by dye studies that they did. It did a hindcasting. In other words, they looked at data they already have because it's extremely data intensive. In fact, I think it was something like 200 different, it sort of was the equivalent of if I recall, like 200 sort of standard desktop computers to run. But what that showed was that during the South Swells, we were getting a much bigger impact than we had sort of thought by the water quality modeling. Scripps has a proposal underway. Unfortunately, no one seems to have the money to sort of fund that. But that is to turn that model that we just completed, but looked at the year 2017, to turn that into a real-time model. What's neat about this model is you can feed in, how much sewage is, in fact, what we did in a paper is to estimate the amount of sort of norovirus, which is what's typically causing people to get sick when they are exposed to sewage. Look at the concentrations of norovirus in that water quality, determine sort of what the decay rate of that norovirus is, as well as the dilution as the water sort of moves north or south, and then predict in real time what the actual exposure levels are at the beach. So you would be able to sort of use that model, click on it, and almost like a surf report, know whether it's safe or not to go to the beach before having to wait for a water quality test. Plus, it would be another way to validate the DD-PCR testing. So that's something I think that's on the horizon, and certainly something I think the community would be interested in. If we do, or if anyone can find sort of the money, I think they're looking for $2 to $3 million to turn that into a real time model. But I think it's extremely exciting, and it really is. The SC Coos model that Lance mentioned, it's a great model, but it looks at offshore currents. This really looks at the near shore currents, which can behave quite differently. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Lance, I wanted to, you and I talked a little bit about this in the past, but I think it would be really helpful for the audience. What are all the current sources of pollution, sewage, that are making its way into the ocean? And after talking to you, I was surprised to find out that not all of it's just coming from Mexico. Albeit what we're discharging further offshore, but nonetheless, over time with weather anomalies and ocean currents, I'm sure some of that's making its way back to our nearshore waterways as well. What are all the sources that we're dealing with, so that everybody understands the magnitude of this problem and why putting all the moving parts together have been so difficult?
Well, certainly the biggest ones as of right now are Punta Bandera, primarily in the summertime due to south swells, and also the river valley, primarily after rains. But basically all the data points that San Diego Beach Info provides on the county website are actually outfall pipes. Those aren't tested just for public health. They're tested because they're mandated to be tested for the national pollution discharge permits. So, it's altruistic to say that it's done for public health, but it's also mandatory reporting points. So any of those outfall pipes, which could be stormwater outfall, some are, Coronado, some are county, some are city of San Diego, there's multiple. So those can also be hot spots at any given time. Now you also have things in the bay, like up at Tidelands Park, that's been closed now for a long time, or it's under warning for a long time now. And you have a large sailboat anchorage there offshore. So the point is, as this DD-PCR is used in the way it's used, we can also drill into point source, looking for better markers. The fecal indicator bacteria has been used for 100 years. It's not the pathogens that make us sick. It's indicators of when pathogens are going to be present that make us sick. But now that we have this technology, now it's time to ramp it up. Look at things like Doug mentioned, noroviruses. We can look at real pathogens that are harmful to drill into exactly where these things are coming from. Tidelands has long thought to be because of the anchorage, but there is no testing happening now, and there could be markers put in to the anchorage or the people using their black water tanks in the anchorage to determine whether these are actually the sources of these closures. And whether it be an outfall pipe, you can put markers in these and determine what is actually causing these higher levels or above threshold levels. And that's kind of the next stage of where everything needs to go, is look at the things that are dangerous, look at the point sources of all these things that could be contributing, and find out which ones are contributing.
Thank you. Eric, that's a great opportunity. We had mentioned of the norovirus being the most common, but one of the questions that was posed to me earlier was, is that the only thing in the water that we should be concerned about? We understand that the focus on fecal testing is an indicator of the presence of that particular virus and the potential for exposure. But what else are we not knowing about that we might want to know about? What else is in the water?
Well, there's potentially a lot in the water. And sewage is a stew of various bacteria and viruses and protozoa, which are other unicellular larger organisms like amoeba. And there are pathogenic bacteria, Staphylococcus and Salmonella. There are pathogenic strains of E. coli, and then there are also other viruses. But Lance is right that norovirus is one of the more prominent human viruses. One of and that was the genesis of this concept of fecal indicator bacteria was, it's really difficult to measure all of these things, or even one of them. I mean, viruses present really unique challenges to measure on a routine basis. I mean, it can be done, but you have to filter a lot of water compared to measuring bacteria. And so that's the reason that fecal indicator bacteria have been used for so long, is because they were easy to measure. And it's certainly like the old culture-based tests, they're easy to do. But as technology has evolved and that we've got all these molecular tools, that is the direction that we need to be heading. And there's a lot of research looking at viruses in detail and other pathogenic organisms in relation to fecal indicator bacteria, or potentially other markers that are more specific to sewage. We do have the ability to measure more specific markers and to tease out different sources of these fecal indicator bacteria. I mean, maybe not so much in where you are, but certainly in other areas, there's a lot of cattle that contribute these fecal indicator bacteria. There's even wildlife. And so, that's where this field has been going, is to, use these molecular tools. But it's a process. It's not something that can happen overnight. But it's happening. And in a way, the ddPCR is sort of an entry into that world to get county labs, to get state labs adopting molecular tools, because they're expensive and they require a lot of training and specialized staff, much more specialized than, say, just doing the regular culture-based tests. So, once that equipment is disseminated and gets cheaper, hopefully as time goes on and it's used more, then we may see more of these more specific tests being adopted.
Is real quick before we move on, and I'm going to give everybody on the panel here an opportunity to make one final statement. Unfortunately, we're not set up to take questions from the audience today because I want to get these people out of here. Is this that type of technology what's being used when we hear that they're testing sewage to check the coronavirus surge in areas? Is that the same type of molecular test?
Yeah, I mean it's unique to that particular virus, and you're looking for different markers, obviously, that are specific to the virus. And but the concept is there. I mean, it's the same, where you're targeting a genetic marker for the virus that can be tracked. And so, yes, that is similar to what they're doing to track the coronavirus in sewage.
Thank you, because for me personally, every time I've read a story saying that they're predicting a surge based on the amount of the virus found in sewage, I always scratch my head going, I'm not really sure I understand how that works. But thankfully, your discussion about molecular level testing for the norovirus, I guess it equates. I'm going to give everybody a chance to start with Richard. Mayor Bailey, any last thoughts, comments, words of encouragement, reassure us that we're safe if we're in the water?
Yeah. Look, at the end of the day, I'm more optimistic than I ever have been that the question is not if, but when, that this issue will be addressed. And based on the EPA's current timeline, I think we're going to start seeing some semi-significant progress end of Q4 of this year or beginning of Q1 of next year. There are a lot of unsung heroes that, when the grand old ribbon cutting happens, that they won't be featured in the headlines or the quotes in the paper, but there are a handful of individuals that our status right now would not have been possible without their efforts. And one of those individuals is Doug Liden. From the very beginning, when the previous administration's EPA kind of took an interest in this, Doug has been just an absolute rock star on understanding all the technical aspects of this, helping all of our entire region get down the learning curve of where are all these sources of pollution and what are some potential solutions to it. So I just want to take this opportunity in front of the entire organization to give Doug those kudos, because it's staff members like Doug that really are the unsung heroes of all of this. And at the end of the day, he's going to be one that deserves an award for seeing this get done. So thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. Very kind of you. And I'm going to move to Doug now.
Thank you. I think I should just
rest.
rest.
Now you get your merit badge. Any last thoughts for us?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Mayor Bailey. It's been very much a team effort. And I think on that note, we did receive some criticism recently by the editorial board and the San Diego Tribune that we weren't moving fast enough. And I mean, I think we're all frustrated by how long it takes for federal projects to get built, designed, go through the NEPA review. And speaking of which, we just, closed public comments on the National Environmental Policy Act review. And it's interesting because we're watching sort of the CBP being able to put up, fences through the border and without having to worry about a NEPA. And it's, sometimes I'm a little bit envious about how fast they can move. But, all this stuff that all these delays are sort of, if you will, are kind of required by law. And so we just completed the public the opportunity for public comment on this our comprehensive solution. We expect to have the record of decision signed before the end of the year, and then we can immediately start on design and construction of these projects. In addition, as I mentioned, I think the reason I was in Mexico City was we recognized early on that basically none of this we can't solve a binational problem without our partners south of the border. And so they really, especially with a $300 million investment that's really going to benefit Mexico by providing more wastewater sewage treatment for Mexico, they really need to bring something to the table. And that's what we were working on to make sure that they get their broken pipes repaired so that we don't have so much sewage going in the river, so that more sewage gets to the international treatment plant, especially when it's expanded, that they start focusing on water reuse. It's really, I was just out there in Tijuana a couple of days ago, and it's like what we see in California, but when you see this highly treated wastewater being discharged into a very contaminated river, flowing, 10 miles upstream, and then having to be pumped out at a huge cost to the utility, pumped out of the river and to the coast, it doesn't make a lot of sense in the 21st century, especially with the climate challenges we have now. And so I think Mexico recognizes that, and we're going to help them out with moving towards some reuse projects. And then, of course, getting San Antonio Los Buenos up and running is a huge priority for us. So thanks to Mayor Bailey and all the local stakeholders. I know Mayor Dedina has been just being very outspoken on this and getting us this. I've been working on this project, this problem for over 20 years, and this is the first time that I too am extremely optimistic, and it's largely because of all the efforts to be able to get people to bring so much money to the table. I mean, these problems just can't be solved without a serious investment, and I think we finally have an agreement on both sides of the border to making that investment.
Thank you, Doug. Lance, turn to you. Any final comments?
Yeah, I think the other unsung heroes are the Border Patrol down there working in this river valley in this sewage. The first stop I made back in 2017 when the big spill happened was to the Border Patrol to give them some of my PPP equipment, my personal protection equipment, primarily hydrogen sulfide sniffers, that they have to work in this every day. They've had boots delaminated, skin rashes, skin burns. It's a major issue. And like everybody else just mentioned, I'm cautiously optimistic that, we have more momentum now than we ever have on this topic, and probably ever. So we just need to keep an eye on the prize, make sure that these thresholds are met, and the projects keep going, and the EPA now there always a challenge is when the government gets involved in spending the money, is that are we making the best choices? Are we using choices that are current technology and we're not going backwards to retention ponds, other things that many stakeholders don't want, that we use the best resources we can to make this really work the first time out and work well. So
Thank you.
again, thanks to Doug and everybody as well.
Eric, I'll let you wrap up. Any last thoughts on where we stand and where we're headed?
Well, I don't feel like I'm the best one to give the last word, but I do want to acknowledge San Diego and your region for being early adopters in the future in terms of this technology and monitoring using the DD-PCR. And I know that it's caused a lot of unanticipated headaches, but really it's where monitoring is going. You're helping blaze that trail. But ultimately what we want to see is those notifications go down to zero. I mean, that's the goal. And, you know, that lies in the solutions that all the other speakers talked about. And so, you know, our work is not done until that happens. I just am really thankful that I get to be a part of this whole process.
Thank you very much, Eric. And thank you all for taking the time out to help educate us a little bit more about the complexity of the situation, how we got here, and where we're headed in the future. I think it's safe to say, understanding how government works a little bit, since we've got about roughly half of the money that we need to really bang this problem into submission, we're going to have to keep pounding on doors, making phone calls, sending emails to everybody who's in office in any of these areas, because we need to remind them that 300 million gets it started, but it doesn't finish it. And everybody who lives in this region on both sides of the border, we'd like it finished so we can go back in the ocean and be safe and have some fun. So thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it very much. And once again, sorry Serge couldn't join us, but he had an unexpected conflict. Thank you. Morelli, I'll turn it back over to you.